Now guys, just as we saw how China is fighting her trade war with the American now, the EU may be also going to join in this economic war by launching a trade war against China electrical vehicle industry. By now, everyone have witnessed how some China high-value industry have taken on the global market in recent years, especially China EV car maker. Their market share in this Western nation have increased at a speed that may collapse many Western EV car maker business if they are left unchecked for a period of time. In the past 12 months, China EV car sales in Europe have increased by almost 100%. Now that's what may prompt many Western policy makers to react and may introduce legislation to protect their EV car industry to prevent a mass collapse of their industry. So there's a possibility that EU may impose tariff on the import of China EV by July 2024. Now the EU argue that they have found evidence that China government heavily subsidized China EV car makers and that justify their tariff action on China EV car industry. But my personal view is that all these are double standard rules. Every one of us know that a lot of EU government also heavily subsidize their industry to help them to manage their high energy bill. Billions of dollars have been spent by some of these European government on that. So how does that justify the EU argument over here that China government is doing something unfair by subsidizing her industry? Isn't the EU also doing the same in another way? So basically, at the end of the day, we need to understand that the one that stands to lose out the most is the EU consumer. At the end of the day, they are the one that will pay for the extra cost due to the higher costs that come along with their government tariff on China EV car. At the time where the EU economy is trying to recover and get high inflation under control, the last thing that most EU consumer want is to get EV car at a higher cost. Everyone shop for value to money products when times are bad. No one really care that much on where the car is making and the brand of the car. They want something that get them the most value out of their money. The EU tariff on China EV cars certainly are not only China EV car maker bad news, the EU consumer also suffer from that. This is because overall China EV cars are around 20 to 30% cheaper than most European EV car maker. The reason is simple. China technically owns most of the global EV car supply chain, giving them tremendous cost advantage over this European EV car maker. In fact, most of these European EV car makers source the raw material for their EV car manufacturing plant from China industrial. Add on European higher wages costs, higher energy costs due to losing access to abundant amount of cheap Russian gas 2 years ago. The European car makers simply find it hard to compete against China EV car maker. Moreover, the size of China industrial and economic allow her to enjoy economic of scale that give her to enjoy cost advantage for most of her raw material and manufacturing plant. For example, the most important part of the EV car is her battery. China dominates the EV supply chain as more than 55% of the global EV car battery come from China. And more than 80% of the battery cell come from China. And China enjoy a cost advantage of around 30% against most European car makers. And more than 75% of the raw material needed to make EV car battery are controlled by China industrial. So my personal view is that since the European government understand that they cannot win on price war and raw material costs, they now may try to resort to use tariff to try to protect their industry. If they do nothing about it, a lot of this EV industry may collapse. The EU can't afford a further deindustrialization after they have already lost a lot of their industry since the Ukraine war, where they lost access to cheap Russian pipe gas and a lot of their industries suffer from high energy costs and are unable to compete on the international market. And many of them have either left EU or have already closed down. But we got to understand that every massive trade war starts small at the initial stage. China will not sit back and do nothing when her industry get imposed by additional tariff from the European government. And since China technically owns most of the supply chain that most EU EV car maker and other EU industries need, a tit for tat may happen where China may impose additional costs or restrict important raw material export to the European industry. And after a few rounds of exchanging tariff and restriction on each other, a full-scale trade war between China and Europe may happen. Yet again, the one that lose out most out of all these other EU consumers, at the end of the day, they are the one that pay for this additional cost that came along with this tariff and restriction. Keeping inflation under control may suddenly become challenging for most European governments if that happens. The end result may not be what the EU policymakers want to see. More industry in the EU may suffer from higher costs due to the possibility of China raw material export tariff on them, and that in turn cause more of them to lose their global market share due to higher costs, and they may either need to close down or shift most of their industrial manufacturing to nations that enjoy lower costs. And many of them may choose China, where energy costs, raw material, and labor costs are much more cheaper than Europe. Unlike the American, the European may be a weaker player when they fight a trade war with China. The American can always use the dollar as an economic weapon to impose powerful sanctions on nation or company that refuse to comply with American trade sanction or regulation on China, but the EU does not own the reserve currency and she can't do that. Moreover, American energy costs are much more lower than the European. Her industry get to enjoy lower energy bill than the European. And one key fact that we need to understand that technically the EU is not a nation. It's just a bloc made up of many European nations. Each of them have their hidden agenda and may place their own country gain and benefit over the EU bloc, and that may provide China opportunity to divide and conquer them. Just look at what happened around a decade ago when the EU technically launched a trade war on China's solar panel industry, but in the end, it was abandoned by the European as they are not that united on counter China together. Using the tactic of divide and conquer, China is able to get away from the trade war, and today China solar panel industry dominated the global market. The EU solar panel lose out in the global market. The other issue over here is that if a full-scale trade war between the EU and China really happen, it may motivate China to get more closer with Russia, and that does not sound well for the Western camp because that means Russia may get more help from China in her sanction war against the West. Because if the EU also start a trade war with China, then China will have no choice but to maybe place all her bet on Russia, because with the EU joining the American to conduct a full-scale trade war and tech war against China, China will have to face the whole Western camp. If that really happens, China will need Russia to be firmly on her side to actually help her to counter this total economic war against the West. So my personal view is that if the European trigger a trade war with China and a full-scale economy war actually happen between China and EU as a result of that, then most likely China and Russia will move closer together, and that will result in a new economic war where China and Russia on one camp and the American and EU on the other camp. Now, during an economic war, the nation with the least resource are the one that may suffer the most. As I mentioned earlier on, the American control the global reserve currency. She also have a lot of oil and gas, food and raw material. Russian also control a lot of oil and gas, and she make a lot of money out of this energy export, and is also a very important global number one wheat export nation. And China technically is a world factory, world's second largest economy. How about Europe? Europe seems to be the weakest out of these four parties. She lose access to cheap Russian pipe gas, and she now have the highest energy bill out of these four parties. She also depend on China a lot for her raw material import that her industrial needs. Other than imposing tariff on other nations export to the EU, the EU technically does not really have significant powerful tools that she can use during a full-scale trade war against others. The American can use a mighty US dollar to impose powerful sanctions. Russia can use her energy and food export. China can use her raw material export and leverage on the fact that she is a world factory and a lot of nations find it hard to stop buying from her. So a full-scale trade war may result in the EU suffering the most, similar to what happened after the Ukraine war breakout. The EU suffered the most. The industry suffer when her consumer and industry have to pay more after they lose access to the cheap Russian pipe gas. And the EU government not only need to actually spend a lot of money to actually help their company and consumer with energy subsidies to help them to cope with the high energy bill, she also need to actually spend a lot of money to house all those Ukraine refugees that actually run to their nation. Moreover, with a high possibility that, Donald Trump may win this year US president election, the new US president may abandon the EU and get a peace deal with Putin by himself. And the American may also withdraw the bulk of their army out of this European nation. With so much uncertainty that may happen later this year and next year, it does not really seem to be a good idea for the EU to impose tariff on China EV car, because that may actually kind of trigger a full-scale economical war with China, and this will worsen the European economic. But again, the EU car makers are at risk of losing their market share if their government do nothing with the China EV car maker. So basically, the EU government are kind of like maybe in a dilemma now. So what's your view over here? Is it a good idea for the EU to impose tariff on China EV car maker and trigger a full-scale trade war with China? What do you think? Please comment below and share with me. Please subscribe, share and like. Thanks for watching.